Thanks for coming out for this experiment. We're learning as we go. We're seeing what it's like to kind of have an event like this, but mostly I want to thank Constellation and the Walton Arts Center for stepping up and making this happen. Emelie's the director of film, and pretty fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for coming. There's a lot of new faces, which is awesome. We started this club back in October, mostly as a way to build community, to do workshops, things like that, and it's been really great. We've had a good turnout, and it's super exciting. So definitely encourage you guys to come back. Our next meeting is April 22nd, and it's a stunts and fight workshop. So we're gonna have Patrick Kelly, who works for the IU Martial Arts Department, come in. He's gonna do some hands-on stuff, so if you wanna throw some punches at people and learn how to fall, it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, Charles has been great organizing this, and do you wanna go through some introductions to start off?
Sure. I mean, also real quick, we've got some QR codes over here. We've got a shared document that'll show up at the end of the presentation, but the QR code takes you to the Constellation Film Club Facebook page, so you can join up. And also the small meetup group that I run, the Bloomington Motion Artist Group. So every third Thursday we get together at Bishop and have drinks and cry in our beers and talk about something. So join us in either one of those capacities if it makes sense for you. Before we get to introductions real quick, let's see. Yeah, I wanted to do like a quick show of hands in the room because like I don't think we know where people are as far as what they do and you know, whether it's professional or passion, what software you use. So, you know, as we're all kind of like hanging out, who's actually like getting paid and paying their taxes doing media work? Who here is just like a student or for the love of it? You know, quick show of hands, right on. Software-wise, everybody uses Premiere? Sure. What about Final Cut? Final Cut users? Blender or Cinema 4D? 3D folks? Any motion designers with After Effects? Cool. How many people know Resolve? Oh, that's awesome. And then this is kind of fun one I throw up here at the corner. How many people are using CapCut these days on social? All right, a couple, right on. I was just curious about that, so thanks for indulging me.
So no media composer in it.
Well, I mean, if there were TV shows, my understanding of media composer is it's like big team productions. You know, because of how you have to manage the media and the server systems, I kind of made the assumption it didn't have a strong footprint here. But am I wrong? Are there media composer users here?
No, I'm just
Jim?
Yes, I use media composer.
Well, there you go. Thank you. But yeah, let's go around. You all want to introduce yourselves and share your expertise, please.
Do you want me? You made eye contact with me,
Yeah.
so I'll take it. I'm Kevin Weaver. I'm one of the owners of Blue Line, and I would just say, but an editor at heart. That's kind of what I started in. I give Jim right here credit for helping with that, and also Matt Rice over here for helping me fall in love with production and editing in general. So happy to be here. Been editing for I can say like 10 years now, so that's always fun, and always weird to still be in a position where people think I know something. So I'll do my best.
Nice, awesome. I'm Emelie Flower. I'm the director of film with Constellation. I've been probably around 10 years. I've been editing and just been in the film industry. I have done all sorts of small things, bigger things, social media things. Primarily right now with Constellation, we do a lot of marketing materials. So I've unfortunately had to dive into the vertical orientation, which is fun. We'll touch on that a little bit throughout this. But yeah, just happy to be here. Happy to have these guys here.
I'm Steve Sobiech. I've been a musician for a long time and done a lot of audio work. And then I got into video, and it became video of musicians and music and events and things like that. Mostly a one-person team. So anyway, that's
What's the name of your media company?
Which umbrella group? Let's see. I'm Bloomington Gramophone is my video, and Wisconsin Cheese Studios is my audio arm. So.
Gotcha.
I'm Ariane Curry, and I started Hex Media, which is a social media management and production company. My background is mainly in photography, but when social media sort of shifted into video, I got more into video editing. So most of my stuff is short form instead of long form.
Awesome.
And I'm Charles Pierce. I'm from Bloomington. I went to IU, and then I moved away, and I've been doing a lot of all sorts of different types of commercial video production, from live events to brands and food products. And recently moved back to Bloomington and have gotten involved in documentary projects and cool shit like doing meetup groups. So this is great. Thank you all for kind of running through stuff. And just to hop right in, we fielded some questions from people in Bloomington and folks that we knew online, and we wanted to kind of run through questions and use those to trigger and start conversations. And along the way, if there's something that y'all want to have us talk more about, or raise your hand, and we'll make this a dialogue between the audience and us, and we'll even throw in a little bit of Q&A at the end. But this stuff is, come on in. It's all great. This is the goal is to be a little bit informal and kind of figure it out as we go. So if we're talking about something like forgetting about media composer, that's great. Let's just do that. Let's have this conversation. So for the four of you, how do you guys start? I know you're all kind of coming at it from different places and priorities, and sometimes it's a personal project, sometimes it's a client project. But what's your jumping off point look like? One of you, Steve, how about you start off?
Panic. I think some of my projects are pretty small, cut and dry. I do a lot of recitals and then smaller groups, some promo things. But with the bigger projects, I think the first part is just talking to the client the most, just figuring out what exactly they want. And because mine is usually smaller projects, and sometimes they're the first time someone's done a real video. And so they need a lot of hand holding. And I just have to be patient and talk to them. And just before I came here, there's someone that I was talking to quite a bit, trying to figure out exactly what he meant by a poster or whatever he wanted, the text and what kind of fonts and things that they've never dealt with before. So that's what I deal with most. And then organization, just make sure that's the biggest thing. And then we've seen a bit of Charles' editor porn, his beautiful sequences that are works of art. So mine don't look that nice. I wish they did. So anyway, I start with that. Mostly it's a lot of talking to the client because, like I say, most of mine they're first timers in most of what they do. So that's what I do.
It depends on perspective, and so if you're thinking about it from talking to the client the whole way through, maybe you're more than an editor, right? You're doing every kind of bit of the job. So there might be a lot of you who are like, yeah, I edit, I shoot it, I do that. And in that case, you're editing at the beginning, right? You're editing when you are, talking to the client, you're thinking through ideas, you're thinking through concepts. So there's that side of it. But taking it from let's say you're just an editor and, someone here went out and shot 7 days worth of interviews or something ridiculous for a documentary project. That approach is going to be completely different from starting a commercial project that's 30 seconds. So it really kind of just depends on the type of project. So the way I would start is, but regardless of the type of project, there's some sort of what I call a bunch of boring work. To edit, you have to sit in the damn chair and spend time in it. And so how you start, I think it kind of depends. I like to start by going through my basic level tasks. So if it's interviews, and there's a bunch of interviews, and I will literally kind of spend time processing those in some way, or sub-clipping them is what we call it. But basically going through all the interviews, listening to them, and there's a million different ways you can say, here's a good soundbite, here's a good soundbite, here's a good soundbite. If you're doing a commercial edit, it might just be going through all the scenes that have been shot and pulling all the good shots into a timeline. That's kind of a very way to get going. And then you're pushing yourself forward because the creative process is annoying and meandering. And so sometimes you might not have the inspiration that strikes. So I kind of like going through these what are my boring tasks? But then I don't let myself, if I come up with an idea, go chase it. Oh, cool, that'd be a good intro. Let me, throw these few shots together, kind of take a break from my mundane, boring kind of shovel and coal kind of tasks. And there's no avoiding shoveling the coal until you get to a point where you have a team of editors and you make someone else shovel the coal, which is cool, but that luxury is not always afforded. But either way, like that, the organization, if you're sitting down to do an edit, going through it, kind of, or having those conversations with, if it's not a client, with the director, being like, what are the goals of this? What are we trying to do? And going into that sifting kind of with that mindset, that's where I begin.
I think for me, kind of going off what Steve said, is start with panic. I need to be more organized, and Charles is an inspiration to all of us, I think. I know he color codes everything and has assigned tracks, which is what I teach my students, and never do it myself. I need to be better with bins. I need to be better with my timeline. I have a really bad habit of, I don't know how you guys do this, but I have a billion different timelines going on at once. I have they're always named horrible things. Like, it's not helpful, but it's like, if I have a larger thing that I'm doing, I just shot a read through of a play for a playwright that was trying to get this staged. And so we had 3 different readings, we had interviews, things like that. So I have one timeline that's one camera angle that's synced with audio, one timeline with another full run of it. And then I have interviews, and each person at the interview has a timeline. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, honestly. I was never taught the right way to do things. It's just been kind of trial and error, and you kind of find your own system. But somehow having all these many timelines has been helpful to me, so I can just kind of see it vertically of my different sections in the headers. But I think that my least favorite part of editing is the first 2 hours when I'm where the hell is this going? I've definitely worked with a lot of clients or creatives that don't know exactly what their narrative is. I worked on a pilot for a show about the service industry and kind of the spirits industry, and they had no idea what their format was. They said, we're going to Louisville, Kentucky, we're filming interviews and B-roll at 3 different bars, getting the story of that. Other than that, Brian worked on this. Other than that, they had no idea how they wanted to put it together. So I'm sitting there okay, I'm going to create the story. But I think the first few hours of it, I'm it's chaos, and I hate it. But then once you find the story and it starts clicking, then I'm okay, this is satisfying. So
I'd say sort of similarly, kind of panic, but in a collage kind of way. I do a lot of visual arts as well, and I always think about everything it's a collage, and I'm having to go through everything that I've got firsthand and then try to piece it together. A lot of stuff that I do is podcasts. So first I have to listen to the whole podcast and then go back and take out the chunks that I think are going to be the best for social media. It's also really tough trying to find the balance of figuring out what a client might want for a video versus what will do the best on their social media account, which is a little tough. But if it's not any of those things, it's probably just organizing all of my stuff. And I like to make sure that my bins mirror exactly what's on my desktop, so that it's just named exactly the same, because linking is just crazy. I always run into linking problems. I'm sure all of you are familiar.
how often do you guys work with proxies?
I have opinions on that. Rarely, but you need them sometimes, and I would say but I'm also coming from a perspective of having better machines than I used to. When my machine was terrible, I had to use proxies because that was the only way around it. And then I just finished a film called Christine's Wager, and they shot it in 12K, so we totally did proxies. That did not make sense, and we had to run the proxy workflow. And it can be there's positives and negatives. I say if you can avoid it. It's just an extra step. And I think that's a good thing to go in if you are in control of shootings. Do you really need to shoot in 12K? I mean, it's cool, and reframing is nice. So there's some positives to it, but I try to avoid proxies.
Yeah,
But
I think the upgrade in equipment has been a big game changer.
Yeah.
Cool, just kidding.
Well, to what Emelie was saying earlier about there is no right way to do it. People teach you different ways to do it, but the end result is still what matters. I mean, unless you're like in an editing race where it's like you versus this person to like get done as fast as possible. But if someone gets done slower and their piece is more impactful, you know, like, so making different sequences, I think for me, it's like if whatever organization you need to do to get past like decision fatigue, that's kind of how I look at it. It's like editing is making decisions and then putting them together. And so like my strategy for that on sequences is I just version up. If I get stuck, I'm like, well, I'm just going to version that up, and then it doesn't matter if I cut everything out. Like, and usually I never go back, or if I do, most of the time I go back, it's because the client is like, I like that thing better than the other thing, and then I'm like, oh, good. Thank God I didn't just undo this whole sequence and then I have to rebuild it from scratch. Like, I have that there. So I say whatever process you need to move like the thought process forward, like that's where I focus. It's like, and different projects have different techniques. For doc style, I love stacking timelines on top of each other. So that way I can like easily pull like my, if you have your interview one up here and then you have your like best sound bites down here, like the amount of sequences I don't think matters.
This is the stupidest thing ever. There are constantly things where I'm like, I didn't know you could do that.
I get that all the time.
I never
like
thought to put like
people. Yeah.
the two. Oh,
and then you just drag straight into it.
Well, that
like
would've
even if
been
you
really
have like
helpful for my whole
selects
life.
from, I know. Anytime you talk to like, I bet there's a bunch of people in this room too, if you just talk about it. Like I learned a shortcut from a student, like when I was teaching, that I was like, you just saved my life. So yeah, there's all sorts of tricks.
I teach high schoolers and they know
Sorry,
everything.
I just wanted to throw out there, when we talk about versioning with Premiere, there's no native versioning tool. This is editing discipline of duplicating a project or duplicating a sequence inside of the project and naming it correctly, so you remember that the sequence that I did, I worked on it this day with this editor, and you put it into a folder. Some software is getting better about doing automatic versioning, but Premiere is very manual with that still. So that's extra work and extra discipline.
And you do forget sometimes, or you duplicate it, but then you go in the other one, you just duplicate it instead, and then your V11 is your V12, and it's confusing. It's still all the basic mistakes.
Okay, let's check out what our next question is, because I forgot to. Ooh, here we go. This is a good one. This is awesome. This was another one that came into the group, and this is about creative authorship. So editing is collaborative, and you're already hearing that sometimes the editor, like especially with Emelie or Steve, like you're on your own. You're just kind of given it. I got to figure it out, and you start to have a lot of creative decision making that's, just for you. But when you're working collaboratively with a director or a client, where does your expertise kind of end versus what the person that's hired you or commissioned you wants? Where does your authorship begin and end, and where does somebody else's vision who brought you the project begin and end? What does that look like to you guys?
I'm kind of curious to know, like, if you ever get, like, what guidance do you guys get from clients? Like, do you get outlines? Do you get notes? Do you get logs from on set? Like, I don't know how common this is, because I don't. Like,
I mean, hopefully a client is hiring you so you do that instead of them. But I'd say sometimes when someone's like a really big subject matter expert, like you maybe need that direction. Like if you're doing something on like some scientific research or something like that, then you might need some help if somebody's an expert in a certain area. It's just like everything depends kind of with the client, like whoever the client is. I think there's a lot of clients who have really good insights, and you want to try to be able to kind of capture those. But I think if you bring them in early enough, and again, this depends if you're just doing editing or if you're running a whole project. If you're running a whole project and editing, you're having these conversations up front, like with client or with creator. I would say that director relationship is different, because that is where, like, technically an editor is not subservient, but below the director, which makes sense. The director's oftentimes written the film. They've written the film. They have a vision for it. So I'd say it really depends on the specific relationship. If there's trust in there, a director might kind of let you run with it. Same with the client. They might let you kind of run with it, throw a first version back. And if there's a director who has a vision that they're just like, some directors want to be in the room and just look at every single frame. So I've edited things where I've had lots of creative freedom, and I've edited things where I'm sitting with the director like 2 frames left, and I'm like, cool. I would say my advice on if you're in that creative relationship and you have an idea, specifically with the director or client, doesn't matter, and they're like, yeah, I want it this way. If you really care about it, and this depends on if you have time and budget, or how much you care about this whatever creative thing you're thinking about, go do it and show them and say, hey, I did what you wanted me to, right? Like this is what you think. Here's an idea. Look at both, and not from like a way of like, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, but like I thought of this, consider it, and then at least you've scratched that itch. You've done your part, and then, but you've also you haven't like just been like, we need to do it this way because I'm the most creative person in the world. Like it's a collaboration, so like show them your idea.
Yeah, most of mine are projects. I'm wearing all the hats, and so I tend to work a lot with a client. I make sure, and most all the ones I've had so far, they've had a pretty clear vision of what they want, and so I give them what they want first, and then if that doesn't work, then say, okay, we got to change that around. But yeah, most of mine are, I'm working with the client pretty closely and deciding exactly what they want. And then sometimes they don't know exactly what they want, like we all know. We had one guy that was doing a music, he's a Joe Cocker impersonator. And the audio, the video was fine, but the audio at the end, he says, need more punch, need louder, need something, and so I just compressed the crap out of it. And in audio world, you'd compress it, you bring all the levels up and down so it's just one big block of sound, and he loved it. So, all right, that's right, yeah.
I feel like a lot of my stuff is also like I'm top to bottom, like doing most things, but sometimes I find that like working with clients who don't really have a good like vocabulary for what it is that they want is actually really helpful because they're viewing it as like an average viewer. They don't really have all the jargon. They don't really know exactly what they're trying to say. And if I can prototype enough things where I can give them like a few examples of what I might want versus what they might want, we can normally find like a middle ground. But there was one time we were doing like a Blender 3D animation, and our client didn't really know like what it takes to like do what they wanted us to do, nor did they really understand like the limits of like our program and what they had asked for. And so when we were showing them like the unrendered parts before it was like fully ready to go and it was like a long video, they like totally like freaked out and like, this is nothing like what I wanted, like this isn't it at all, like, and we had to end up like scrapping the project because they were like, oh, you can't do it. And we were like, oh, okay, well, sorry. So that's the worst case scenario, but in the end it made us better, I think.
How do you guys handle like rounds of revisions? Is there any point that, like, I know contractually sometimes I know editors that will say like you get X amount of revisions. I guess like I'm just curious for myself, for you guys, how you handle that?
Personally, I put the language in just as a safety. I don't really intend to enforce it because what is a revision? Oh, did you misspell the title of something? And so really it's just like, for me, it's less about rounds of revisions and more like, how are you managing the scope? Because there's some projects where you're doing and you're like, well, I'm just going to edit this until it's done because it's a passion. I care about this project, and there is no scope. Like it's just something I'm going to edit forever. And then so I think it's a conversation with the client. I put like 2 or 3 in just so that way people aren't necessarily like, we can change it whenever. But like at the end of the day, for me, it's like, I want a good project and a happy client, and if it's a good relationship, then I'm going to want to move forward on it. If it's not working out, then maybe it's a client I don't want to work with. So it's not about the rounds of revisions, it's about how difficult the whole process is. And kind of on that with the editing and creative, I think that kind of goes back to like the most important thing is whatever that shared language is, what, not talking about jargon, but like what is the goal? If you can align with director, client, whoever, of what is the goal of this, then when you're doing editing, then you can go back to what's your why. Because if people understand what your decision-making matrix is, then that's something different. Oh, I put this in here because you said you wanted to make people cry. So I did this because of what you said, and that makes that whole relationship better. Then all of a sudden, whoever you're working with is like, oh, they did this because they listened. And they're trying to take my vision and enhance it.
You talk about revisions and keeping going. Like when I would do a lot of audio jobs, I have this little card picture that I found. It's it's of a skeleton and cobwebs hanging over an audio mixing board, and on the motto is, "The mix is almost finished." So I think that happens in video often.
There's that joke that like the worst thing you can hear as an editor is that they want to change the music, and I'm like, yeah. I know people like handle that differently. Personally, like anything that I do, I'm trying to find a pacing to it. So I think that if there is ever music incorporated, it's like that has been a huge way to ruin my day at times. But I ask like about revisions because I've gotten stuck, and there was one client that I ended up dropping. It was a musician who he was like, "We're gonna go viral with these videos," and I'm like, "That's not how that works." But yeah, okay. And so he just had this vision of like, here's how I want to do it, and then he changed it after like 3 rounds of notes, and I was like, this is ridiculous. But it was just small things continually, and it went on for like 2 weeks of revisions, and so that's why I'm like, I guess everybody has their own limits and their own negotiations, but I'm like, I don't know, man. I've gotten trapped in that a few times, and I think a lot of it is like they don't know what they want, so I don't know.
I've usually done 3. I write it in the contract. It's 3 major revisions, but like you say, it's 3 times 10. I don't know.
Well, because then it comes down to the point where, depending on the relationship, maybe you want to lob an edit one over earlier because you want feedback, but then that would lead to more of it. Like that's where it gets tough. Or if you wait too long to give it to them. So it depends on what your strategy is. And sometimes some people are going to be better collaborators, and you might say, "Let me throw you just an A-roll cut of these interviews and tell me what you think." But then there's other people you send that to, and they're like, "This edit is garbage," but they don't understand. So I think the scope question, the amount of revisions, depends on who you're working with.
Do you guys take advantage of deadlines for benchmarks as opposed to just counting revisions?
There's deadlines, and then there's enforcing.
Like a rough cut by this date, and it doesn't matter how many iterations it takes to get there, or?
I like deadlines.
I've done some of that before, but it normally ends up making it like more stressful in a way that's not necessarily productive to the process, I think, especially when I'm trying to work with people who are also on tight schedules, like normally business owners, who this is like their secondary thing. This is like, they paid me to do it, so they didn't have to think about it at all. And so if it's like a deadline-based thing, I always run into them like just not looking at it in time to get it back to me by the revision deadline, so that then we can get to work.
Exactly. It's so hard to force client on revision deadlines because they're paying you, and you don't want to be a dick. Like, it's and at a certain point, it's like you have to understand that like maybe somebody can't get back to you in 24 hours because they have to talk to 7 other people before you get that feedback. So I think planning that in. But I will say that just events in general, and there's a guy who works with us, Mitch, who loves this. It's like if there's an event, that's the best deadline ever because it has to play at the event. Other deadlines are arbitrary and people push them all the time. Like a deadline isn't real unless there's an event that it's being played at, basically. I mean, people push back website launches all the time if something isn't ready. So like just host an event. And then it has to get done, and that's the way to do it.
I keep asking you guys questions, sorry, but I'm just genuinely curious. When it comes to like file sharing for either revisions or like big size transfers or any sort of technical collaboration, what do you guys do for that? Because I know that I'm just reliant on like Dropbox and Google Drive for a lot of things, but I know there's also like, there are collaborative ways to work remotely on things. I know a lot of people use Frame.io for things. It's just like, I'm curious to know when it comes to that, especially big files. Like I've physically shipped drives before, obviously, and like, all of the clips and everything, but I don't know, just interested in knowing what you guys do.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff I do is remote. So I have clients in North Carolina and Chicago, and it's really frustrating to get like the full like podcast footage from people. And so we use Google Drive most of the time, and thankfully you can like have that connected so it'll like link to the editing. But what really sucks is if like when I'm working with my business partner who's also remote, being able to make sure everything lines up. So we've just started literally like sending like hard drives back and forth. It's kind of slow, but at least everything's like there. Yeah.
I'm kind of back to, I'm at the same place. Like we have an office in North Carolina, and shipping hard drives is still the easiest and fastest way. But we have this like kind of high, it depends on who you're sharing with. If you're sharing with a client on that side of it, I've done Frame.io for a few projects. That's usually when like someone who was like hiring me was using Frame.io, and like I like it, it's fine. For us, like Vimeo is great. Like it's where everything is, and you can leave comments on there, and it just depends on like how much access someone needs. But if you're like working with a group, I would say on the collaborative side of editing, not quite file sharing, but Adobe Team Projects, we've kind of adopted across the board for every project for lots of reasons. One, it's great to edit in a team, and two, it's nice to be able to, even if you're working with an editor who's a contractor, if they have a team project and you both have the footage, you can hop in and, you know, say something terrible happens, or you have an event that the video needs to be played at, and said contract editor gets sick, or they just don't do a great job, you can hop in the edit, you can make the changes, you have the footage. But that does require some sort of file sharing beyond the footage, so we use Google Drive as kind of like our cloud as well, because the desktop kind of, you know, client really makes it smooth. So a combination of Google Drive for what, like not big files, like all of your photos, all of your After Effects files, all of your, you know, anything that isn't like over like 5 gigs basically. And then everything else kind of gets mirrored with whoever has the footage, because it's just, we're not there yet. We'll get there where it's going to be all over, you know, kind of our internet connection, but we're not quite there yet. So shipping is still what we do for a lot of it.
When you're working in the Adobe teams or whatever, can you see who's done what? Like, is there a...
There's a history, and it shows you can see who's in, like a little icons pop up.
Oh, nice.
And
yeah.
There's some clunky bits to it where you can kind of step on toes, and they've made some updates recently. I will say, after a large project goes, I would convert it to a regular project, because I just tried to open up a film and it took like 2 days for it to relink. The way it maps the media is a little more complicated, and that now we have to, you know, get everything prepped for distributor, and it took 2 days to open the project back up, and I thought it wasn't gonna open for a while, and I was like, you know, getting on Reddit and trying to figure out what to do. So I would say at the end of a team project, it's a large one that has a ton of footage, I would convert it to a regular project just as a safety. But yeah, Adobe Team Projects was a game changer. You know, it kind of changed how we edited and how you're able to collaborate with kind of, you know, your team.
Nice.
Let's see what the next question is. That was a great tangent. That was awesome. Okay, so we have from Emelie a piece that earlier was filmed. Maybe you should tell us about it. But this was an opportunity to look at a challenge that needed to be fixed or repaired.
Yeah, so for every show that we do at Constellation, we start doing these like conceptual cinematic trailers to kind of just show off, you know, the vibe of the show. A lot of theaters started doing something to that degree. And we do advertising on social media, and we put it on our YouTube channel, and we include these in newsletters. So there's so many different sizes that need to go out. And so for every one that we do, we're also doing a vertical version. And without fail, every time that I do this, I don't plan for the vertical version the way that I should. And this was one where I was talking with the team so much. I did these animations there's like 4 animations in there that I was like, I'm not an animator. And that was fun. So I spent so much time, and I'm like, now they don't fit. And so I don't know if you guys have had this. I know that you work with social media a lot, so I'm like, I don't know if you've had this problem, but this was something I sat down with, and I was like, what the hell do I do? Which we figured it out, but I'm like, I think it's just an example for myself of like poor planning. And if you're not in charge, you know, if you're not on set and doing these things, like you have no control over that. But if I were to just get handed this, I'm like, I don't know. So, I don't know.
So is this just a shot, or it was these animations that were up on the side?
I don't know if you watch this or not, but there are like these 4 little animations that pop up. And I'm like, how the hell am I going to get him and these animations with the direction that he's facing?
How did you do it?
Very creatively. We did shoot for that wider shot. There was like a much wider shot. That was the only thought that was given to anything vertically. And so the there was a way to kind of like stack them above him. And there's one shot at the end where like all four were on screen, but it's like you're losing so much of the animation itself. So I don't know. That's just
So you had
poor
to move
planning.
The animation, you had to move the animation.
Yeah. Which, wasn't the end of the world, but it's like because he's looking in different directions and there was no plan for where those things are going to go, and it's not going to make sense if he's looking. I don't know. I think it's just an example of like, even though I had a hand in how this was planned, I messed it up. But I think it's like how, I feel like there's a lot of times where I get handed something where I'm like, this shot is not consistent. Like there's no continuity. He's not looking the right way at the same time or things like that. And I'm like, how often does...
What if you just turn the whole thing? Like what if you just screw it and just made a cool sound effect and then like just turn it up, like so he's looking up but the thing's up there and you just go totally, I mean that's one thing, just like kind of just go nuts with it.
Yeah.
Anything that I want to like hide, I just throw a sound effect on it and then it seems intentional. So like it's like a cheat code basically. But like what if you just turned them sideways in the frame and which I mean.
This is what I was afraid of. And it did end up working out in the end, but
you just make them all smaller.
Yeah,
basically?
Because there was a little bit of a wider shot on him, and so there was a little bit more room to still have them like all four around. But I'm like, I've been handed stuff from other people where this does not make sense. Now let me figure out how to creatively save this, and I know that happens for pretty much any editor. So I don't know if you guys have examples of, when that's happened to you, how you handle that, like creative problem solving. Yeah.
I have a question. So when did the vertical nature pop up? Like when did you know that, I have to do this vertical now?
It's from the beginning. This has happened for...
What platform was that for?
We run ads on Instagram, so it's Reels, and also there's the element of in some of the preview screens and certain ways that you're viewing it, it's then like 1080 by 1330 or something like that, and so then I get stuck all the time where our advertising team is like, hey, that text is not in there. So I think it's interesting like when you're shooting and editing for two different formats of things, and like there's so many things that I still just don't think about. This is like the 6th time I've done this to myself, so you would think that I would learn. But yeah, I don't know if obviously you guys have experiences of getting handed something that just doesn't work. I was like, how do you fix that? Where do you start with that?
I mean, I've done things before where I'm like, rotate your phone this way and give you a little animation, and then it's interactive for the user, so that's kind of fun. Also, if you can like capture someone's attention enough to make them rotate their phone, then you probably have a user that's going to like experience whatever ad longer. I also have done the thing where you like stack the videos on top and you like blur them, so then it's just like the center. I mean, I don't know if that's like really what you're going for. Sometimes I'll do the thing where like you sort of like pan left to right, you just like move it over a little bit while he's like over there interacting with this, and then move it to the side.
Yeah. I did have to move him around a lot.
You're talking about moving it while the shot's going.
Yeah, while the shot's going.
Yeah.
Also then because everyone's attention span on social media, it's getting shorter and shorter, and we just gotta like roll with it at this point. More movement, good, not always great. One time we were so a lot of the stuff that we get is like remote, like people are sending it to us. And I work with this like team they're essentially like a frat kind of. And so they were collecting a bunch of like footage, and some people were doing it vertical, some people were doing it sideways. And so no one had like communicated with them what they needed to do. So I had like half the shots vertical and the other half horizontal. And I just was like, I can't use this, but I just did it anyway. And it looked fine. Like it was okay.
I know that you've edited some, longer form stuff. How often is this
vertical?
No, not vertically, but how often? Yeah.
Oh, I mean, like this stuff happens all the time, and everything is such a custom solution. I mean, usually it's painful, I guess is the way to put it. So like in post on the Good Catholic, they reshot the ending, but like. It was just a miscommunication. No one talked to like the DP about like what lens was used. Like they used basically they reshot the ending, but they reshot at a different time of year. So we had to roto. It was like a 52-second roto shot, of Zach like going up and knocking on the door at the end of the movie, but we had to replace the background, but it was shot on a different focal length than the background shot, so then you had to kind of smash those two things together. But really what it ended up being was just a really painful roto that we found someone to do, because I don't know how to roto. I just know that we had to do that. And so often like the things that happen, they're just usually painful and long and tedious. And sometimes maybe there's a creative, elegant solution that is simple, and sometimes there is. But on longer stuff, it just depends on how big the problem is. That's kind of an easy problem. At least you knew that like there was an end on it. I can't think of any other problems. I think that won't be a big one. I'm like, they just changed the title to a movie I finished, but that'll be easy, I think.
Yeah, I think continuity just ends up being a big issue with narrative things. And I've gotten in the position before where then a director's like, well, I didn't want to cut this way. I'm like, well, that's kind of the only way that it's going to be able to be put together. So I think there are those technical issues that you run into that like compromise the creative vision of it.
Well, I'd say that continuity, like that's where you just have to really get creative. I don't remember, I guess it was a recent movie that I worked on called Christine's Wager, where we just reorged the whole first act. It was to solve a couple kind of pacing issues, but like you have to go back and just kind of think outside the box. Now, a lot of directors might not want to do that, but we're like, what if we move this scene over here and this scene over here? And, we still kept continuity. If there are major continuity errors, again, then maybe that scene, all of a sudden you put some weird music to it and it's a jump cutty scene. Like you kind of have to, like, if you have to have something a certain way and someone's like, I need it this way, like you kind of have to, like, if there's mistakes, sometimes leaning into the mistake is the way to go. Rather than trying to hide it, it's just like, this is how I'm going to intend it to be, but then you have to make everything around it kind of fit that. You just have to make someone believe whatever you're trying to do. So, I mean, if it's like a continuity error of like, somebody hit somebody with like a sword and it was messed up there, like I think you have to get creative with the style of editing. Like cut to black for a second, and or start bringing in flashes, or like you just have to invent shit basically. But continuity is the worst.
I was editing a short that was shot by a DP who it was his first narrative film. He came from like shooting for the Colts and things like that, and like had never shot narrative. And on the end of day one, before day two, he asked me, what's the 180-degree rule? And I was like, oh shit, okay. And so I was like, let me draw you a diagram and explain this. But the stuff from day one, there's two people like laying on a blanket opposite like their heads. It was completely shot the wrong way. So everything got mirrored and like it ended up being okay, but it was just, I was like, oh great, okay.
Most of my problems come from audio and musicians and getting out of sync or drifting, the audio drifting. And so, or I had a big group, there were 55 musicians and a lead singer. And we had 9 takes of one little 3-minute song. And so the singer was going to do his own version of the song, of mixing the song, the audio only. And so and because none of the takes were done with speakers and done to, each one was its own. And they were pretty consistent. But this one I was calling Charles about because, of course, the sync issues, they're pretty close, but I had to, disguise, cut to something else to just hide the problem with the sync that was going to happen the next second. So this is all stressful to talk about. Makes me nervous. But I finally got something that hid the mistakes or distracted, like you say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
There is no spoon.
Yeah, I think I've done that trick too, where, oh shit, it's overexposed or it's underexposed. I guess this is a black and white shot. Yeah. Just the way explain you just some visual language covers you. Speaking of that, rolling through the next thing, we also have another video clip. This is an example that was sent to us where the question was, how was this made? And I don't know how it was made, but I thought it would be a really fun conversation for us to take a look at the example and just kind of look at it and see if we could guess how it's made. Because it's pretty cool. It's a title sequence.
Real quick, Charles. Grace, was there anything that you wanted to say about it, or any questions specifically, just to, I guess, to catch people up? Grace has, and we'll, if it's okay, we have a link to the scene that you shared. Sure. Okay, so we'll show the scene, the portion of it that Grace is trying to accomplish, something like this.
Something I try to accomplish in my own field, and I feel like this is a reference. This is what I try to, but I don't know how to do it.
Okay.
All right, so we'll watch the first clip first.
It should start it where that scene is. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to connect to it. It's okay. So there are all these like moving images, and I know you wanted to kind of blend them together in a certain way.
Yeah, so it started with this actual bonsai tree, but then it morphs into a Western oil painting, impression painting, and then it becomes a Chinese ink painting. But this is not done right. It should be done one brush at a time, and that's what the reference film shows. So that's what I want to accomplish. But this is my concept. Is a real tree morphs into a Western impression painting, brush by brush, into a Chinese ink painting brush, and then come back to a real tree. So that's the sequence. So yeah.
Yeah, and Charles and I were talking about just the different layers and that 3D effect. Like, how'd they
building
do this?
training suggests to me 3D software.
Yeah. I mean, I think this was all custom done for sure. It wasn't just taking existing material. So I think that's going to be the big challenge there. And I was like, I don't know how to accomplish that with just materials that exist and not creating these actual brushstroke pieces of it.
One thing that I've been dabbling in is like AI stuff, where you can give it like a prompt of where you start and then where you want it to go at the end, and then it fills in everything for you. Like, I don't know how you guys feel about AI particularly, but I've used it a lot for like fun little things, especially like sort of almost like stock images and whatnot. But yeah.
Charles, what was your thought on that? Oh,
No.
Ethan, did you have something? Okay.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a whole lot of After Effects work.
Yeah.
The way the layers kind of stack up, there's depth to it, which suggests to me a 3D camera is being used. Because each one of those layer planes can be an animated clip where the background is just transparent. So if you have an animation of a paintbrush stroke, like a single one, that's one animation layer in After Effects. Then you can put a different animation layer behind it that does a different piece of movement and creation. And then you can separate those with virtual depth. And that's what gives it that feeling of being in a more bodied space. But, there's also some, some of these are just like simple titles that are just coming in and out. But I think one of the things that's really important is how like soft and easy it moves. So like they're paying a lot of attention to their keyframe usage. So everything is moving in a really controlled pacing. And there's a lot of like really nice fades, so you're not seeing hard edges to anything.
Yeah, I think because I'm just trying to think of a practical way without, I know you're not going to dive deep into After Effects. So I don't know where you got the artwork from, but I think the easiest way, like Charles was saying, these transparent backgrounds, if you could find pieces of artwork that were just more like line work or things like that, where you could remove the background, then you're going to have a lot more control with the way it looks when it fades in and the zooms and things like that. Then you're going to be able to see, more in the background. So I think if there's ways that you can find artwork or create artwork that doesn't have a background,
You can also
I think that's probably
take
gonna be
one of the paintings, and you can bring that into Photoshop
Yeah.
first, and you can use your lasso tool to separate out different elements in Photoshop, and then those can become independent elements that are independent layers in After Effects. And there are masking tools that control how things reveal. And you can go real deep with what masking is like in After Effects, but the basic idea is like each layer has its own animation for how it's revealed. And then all of that becomes exported with a transparent background and brought back into Premiere, so it's placed in your sequence for timing and editorial decision making. But it can be a lot. I've done a couple like animated album covers for like a Joyful Noise up in Indianapolis, and they will send me a JPEG from the artist that made the album cover. And the first step is sitting in Photoshop, taking every single layer that I want to work out of it. And sometimes it'll be a stack real big, sometimes it'll be real lean, but it's breaking it all apart first, and then taking that into After Effects and seeing how it works. And then sometimes you have to improvise a little bit if it doesn't look right.
In theory, you could do it in Premiere. It's just going to be, you're going to be a little limited and it's going to be more tedious. But if you're kind of keyframing your zooms and pans and things like that, I've definitely pushed the limits of, you know, what I can do with movement in Premiere. But I know After Effects.
You could work with a
Absolutely.
mask in Premiere. Like if you work with a mask and feather it, it can at least make it come in a little softer. Because that's what's that's part of the not getting the softness. It's okay in Premiere, it works better in After Effects, but also like, you know, you can't always go and learn a whole new program. But with Premiere, I think you could get close. I think it's like you either to mimic that effect, you got to find someone who really knows After Effects, who wants to do it, but to find the inspiration of it, you know, keep the simplicity of it. Like you're matching, these match, but like see how that box, like the squares there, if you put a mask around that and edge feather it, which you can do in Premiere, that at least will get rid of the hard edge. And then when it blends in, you could even blend in and then expand and, you know, keyframe the mask out from something small to kind of big and have a little bit of control over that. And you can do that in After Effects, it's just a lot better in After Effects, but then you have to learn After Effects too, which is, it's an extra step.
Because I don't want the whole image to show up
Yeah.
at once, no matter how slowly it is. I don't want one brush stroke at a time. Is stop animation a step?
Stop motion animation?
Stop motion involved in this process?
If you were drawing them out,
Yeah, if you were actually drawing it, then
you could.
that could work.
You could have somebody draw a painting and then you do a series of photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
do it that way. If you use something like the GoPro and some other kind of cameras, they will actually record in linear video, but it will be just sampled images. And one of the cool things about Premiere and After Effects is you can take an image sequence series, as long as it's numbered 0 through 100, and that folder, you can drop it into your software, and the software will interpret it as a video clip. But it's actual images.
And then you put transitions between those images too, and depending on the transition you put on, that could make it feel smoother a little bit, like if it was tons of single images. But it'd be painstaking process for kind of either way, but to get there in Premiere, those are a couple ways.
I was just trying to think like, so say you had these transparent, you know, images, the background, it's just the isolated like outlines of the tree or that, you know, part of the tree. I was trying to think of like, is there an easy way to have a transition that has, you know, a part of like from a certain direction it's appearing in? Like, can you feather a crop?
Yes.
So in theory,
Yes.
you could
You can make some motion with it.
keyframe a feathered crop and have that. I know this is like,
Yeah, you could.
I'm happy to like go through this with you, Grace. But I think there are solutions to make it look similar without having to go into an external, like another software. I think it's just, those are the things where it's like, sometimes if I didn't know, you know, certain tools like this, I wouldn't even know what to Google. And I think I still run into that where
That's
I'm
a
like,
crop.
I have this problem and I don't know how to even explain it.
Right.
So I think that's why it's like, it's helpful to have multiple brains of like, okay, here's a way you could do it, here's a way you could do it. I didn't think about this tool.
You
So
know, another thing that you could look at is going onto like a stock footage website that has brush strokes and painterly effects already, or really interesting video clips of things. And then you can use the blend mode tools that are built into Premiere to stack up your different video clips. And blend modes, I'm gonna fuck up the description, but it's basically when you stack two things on top of each other in the software and you adjust the opacity, the computer has to make a mathematical calculation on how much of the pixel on top versus the pixel that's underneath is being shown. Usually it's like 20%, 50%, whatever. But blend modes will do different interpretations of that pixel information based on color. So if you set a blend mode to like multiply, all your blacks pass through and you see the light underneath. What I do is I read every once in a while what these definitions are, promptly forget, and then go to the menu and just click through all of them until I see the ones that I look up. And I've asked many of my colleagues about it. That seems to be what a lot of people do, is they just kind of cycle blend modes until they like the look of it, because there's not really a difference in optimizing your processing power or your rendering between different blend modes. They all kind of are about the same weight on your computer. So it's very much a creative decision. So you might take a look at that as well, because you can stack video clips, and I've done this for music video work all the time, because it just looks neat and you get cool surprises, and it's just unjustified visuals, which sometimes are just really cool.
That's a great company name.
Yeah.
Right there. Unjustified.
People do also have, like, I know there are transitions that I've you can install like custom transitions into Premiere. So I found like a few free packs of things and some that I've paid for, but it's different types of transitions that you can go beyond just the ones that come with Premiere. So I don't know, there may be something like that where it is kind of, like a feathered crop action that does it for you. So you could look into, on top of, you would still have to do some of this isolation with the backgrounds, but you might look into kind of just some transitions that other people have made that you could either buy or just download for free.
Yeah, and these special effects are a lot like different approaches to editing. And sometimes there's not firm rules so much as do the results work? Did you sell the effect effectively? And so if you are able to create an effect that works and it's a one-time thing and you got there in a really weird way and you never really have to like look behind the curtain on how that happened, it's fine. If you have to repeat it 45 times in a row, maybe you're going to care about optimization. But there's been a lot of times where I will make it happen in a project, and then when that project is over, I never want to revisit how we got there because it was messy, but it worked. So there's also that sometimes you solve a problem and you're just solving that immediate problem rather than thinking about framework.
Grace, did you have any other questions on that?
No.
I know that was a lot of info.
Yeah, that's it. But I'm just wondering which one is more labor intensive or maybe more expensive? Is to have a person actually painted brush by brush using stop motion or use these fancy software tricks to do it? Which way is that?
I mean, in theory, you could, teach yourself along the way kind of how to do some of these things that we're suggesting. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what the artist is, I mean, you might have a friend with a hidden talent that could paint you some bonsai trees. But I think if you're willing to, put in the time and kind of Google a lot of things, and I'm happy to go through some of the things that we talked about afterwards. I mean, I think that's going to be a no-cost way for you to do it. So it's really just, or you could pay somebody to do it. But yeah, I think those are just two different directions that you could go.
I did do intro animation on Procreate, which I thought was really easy. And you just kind of keyframe each stroke that you make. And what you can do actually is you could overlay the picture on there and trace it almost. Just do it bit by bit, and then every time you save the keyframe, just like vanish the top portion. That's like really painstaking, but you might be able to have more control over it, and it's a lot more intuitive to kind of have it like in front of you when you're drawing than all the emerging and different opacities that you need to do with like something in Premiere. But of course then you'd have to have like Procreate, and that's something like outside of your software.
Yeah, I've definitely done that before.
Yeah.
Played around with the
Also
animation
as a
things.
timeline editor, you can do animation in Photoshop. It's clunky, but if you can draw or you understand that software, you can make some animations happen in it too. Okay. What's our next slide? This is great for me. I built these and I have no idea what these are.
Yeah, I don't either.
Oh, this is another great question. So this is one because as much as like we're knowledgeable and expertise people, like there's also a certain amount of if you're limited in your resources, how do you get started? If you're just at the very beginning, what can you do to take the most advantage of the limited supplies that you have? So this was kind of like a theoretical question. If you have a phone and a laptop, and a really cool idea, like how do you get started to try and make the most out of that idea? It's pretty open-ended. There's a lot of ways this could go, but how do you make the most of limited resources?
It's funny you asked that because in May we're going to be doing a 48-hour film challenge. So everybody has a cell phone and a laptop. So yeah. Have you guys shot anything on like a phone for any reason?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just saw a film at the IU Cinema a couple of weeks ago. It's a documentary. It's called Safety Reimagined, from a guy from LA, former musician. And yeah, in the credits it said shot on an iPhone. Although I have to say, the video, okay, it worked. His audio was great, so it worked there. But yeah, the video, I noticed it's like, what's up with that guy's face? You know, it looks, the skin was morphing into something. So it wasn't, okay, it worked, it's fine. It worked for his purpose. And the audio was great, so.
And that is what always gets me, is that if the audio is great, chances are that I know a lot of people have filmed features on their phones, and I actually think the visual side is there. I think visually, like, phones are great. You could do a whole film out, you have a good idea, it's fine. Your limitations are gonna be your limitations with any camera that's not as good. Probably not gonna perform as well in low light situations, not gonna perform as well in, maybe being able to, kind of shoot in different scenarios. But then I've seen a lot of those films that have done that. There's a guy recording sync sound separately, who's like, so yeah, they're shooting it on the the iPhone or whatever, and then there's a guy chasing him around with the boom pole still because that's not there yet necessarily. Like, so that's what I'd say is, I mean, whatever you're doing on a phone, cool. Think about your audio and how you can make it better, and then if your limitations are kind of your equipment, then how do you make your edit better? How do you make your idea better? Like, what can you do to make your concept come through? But then I would say, like, also, if you're shooting a movie and you have dialogue, that's going to be tough. If you're shooting like a commercial and you can do VO and you're using a phone, you can put a blanket over your head and record a decent VO just like that. So it depends on what type of audio you're getting, basically. But I think shooting on a phone works great.
He had good shots. I mean, the composition was good. So he had, the setup, the frames, it was framed well, and lighting wasn't bad. He did well with everything else. I just noticed at one point, this one guy's side, the light side of his face was like, what's going on there? Is he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. Sometimes I think phones have advantages. I remember when the DSLR revolution came out, which was when I was in college, that there was actually advantages to going and shooting with the smaller format camera for interview subjects because people felt more comfortable. And so I think the same thing can apply on the phone. Like, it's more casual in some ways because it doesn't seem as professional. Maybe people are actually more comfortable in front of camera. Maybe you're actually able to get that angle from the side, or I know I'm trying to like snipe my kids and film them without them realizing it, and get my own stuff captured. But I think that the lower profile can help build comfortability. And I mean, even in cinematic shots too, it's like, cool, I can just put my phone on the floor. Like, I don't have to have a whole lighting setup and change and move between locations. I think there's some nimbleness to it too if the idea is good and you can figure out good audio.
Yeah. I think that like limitations really like make you more creative, and like there's also a lot of like CGI today, a lot of effects that happen in post-production instead, when you could actually make the feeling of the story come across just as easily by doing it all like in camera when you're there filming something. And that could be as simple as like getting like a flashlight and like moving it outside the car while you're inside to make it look like you're driving, and I think that your phone is really powerful, and it depends on where you're going to put it too. Like, if you're making a whole movie and it's just going on YouTube, like, you can do a really good job as well. Audio though is important. But I had got these like really cheap like lav mics from Amazon, and they do a great job. I mean, it's all right.
I don't usually edit like a lot of iPhone footage in Premiere, but there was a thing that I don't remember what my solution to it was. I know I Googled like why the hell does it look this way, but something is different about like the color profile.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what the fix is for that. I just like did a Google deep dive, but I thought that was really,
Yeah.
that's going to be like a weird hang up.
It is annoying,
that
especially if you're trying to like mix things together. I can't remember what it is, but I have run into that too.
Yeah, it's like within the settings of something. Have you guys dealt with this?
Not specific. I mean, but if you're shooting in ProRes off your phone, is it the same thing or is it different formats? Because I feel like if you're shooting in, I mean, a lot of phones can shoot ProRes now, and that's an Apple, like that codec supported by Premiere. But I haven't experienced it, but I'm sure I've experienced it with like a Sony FS7, like different color profiles and everything being magenta, and having to fix that later. So there, you can fix it in the ingest settings or just in color correction with a LUT. But I haven't. You've done it with the phone.
Yeah, my students have done that before, and they're like, "What? How do I? What's wrong with it?" And I don't remember what the solution was, but that's one thing that I've seen that like is a weird, just like extra curveball that you're thrown.
One thing that I just learned was like the differences between like when you're like editing in your certain like display, and then when you like export it to like something else, it's gonna look totally different. Which like, duh. Like obviously now I know that, but like I was editing, I was like, why does this look so bad? Like it looks so good in here, and then all I had to do was like shift to MOV instead of MP4, and I was like, duh. But at the beginning, it's like, oh my god, like everything that I just did, now it looks like shit. Like what? But
yeah, and I think just iPhones. There's so many. We've talked about. We had somebody offer to do like an advanced iPhone workshop, which I think could be cool. Because he uses like all these attachable lenses and gimbals for your iPhone. There's just so many things that you can get, and mics. There's so many things you can get that like you could. I've seen people shoot stuff for like concerts and stuff for sure, like on stage footage with just like a rig for their iPhone, and a lot of it looks really cool. So I think that'd be cool. There's probably things that
iPhone.
Yeah, there are probably things I haven't even thought about. But
I did use one of those like Cinebloom filters on an iPhone once, and it made it look really good.
Yeah.
Like it looked really nice. Yeah.
Do you, I guess like, so I teach summer camps where we do iPhone camps where kids have a week to make their little short films and they shoot on an iPhone. And we used to have them edit in iMovie because we just want to give them like free ways to do things. We used to have them edit in iMovie, and then I had the big question come up of, oh, can we edit in CapCut? And at first I was like, but there's a phone version and a desktop version, and the desktop version goes beyond what I thought it would. But I think like in terms of workflow, if you're just staying on your phone, unless I'm doing like any sort of motion with it or like intercutting it with actual footage, which like, I mean, sometimes you would be, I never bring it into Premiere.
Yeah. I've done like entire like social media like series only on my phone, and normally it's because I'm like traveling or something and I'm just like, you know, going, it's a lot slower, but like if you want to do it you can. Also sometimes it's like it's nice to take out some of the stress and like pressure of like the editing process, like where it's just like, oh, I just have to like make this come together in some type of way, and then I get less obsessed with the exact frame that it comes on and like just exactly how it's lining up. And then it's still, for me, a lot of the times it's just like getting it done for like the end of the week, because we have to make like, you know, 5 posts a week, and it's just like one in the sea is not that big of a deal. But I think if you're going to edit something that's longer than like 10 minutes, you should definitely do it on like a desktop if you can.
That sounds terrible, editing on a phone. I just like, I'm an old dog now, but it's like I'm trying to be off my phone like all the time, but it would drive me mad. I know I like the idea of the flexibility though of being able to do it on the go. Like that's nice, not have to.
Most of those apps you can also get for an iPad, which has been, that's been nicer. Yeah, because it is mobile, and like I do have a keyboard for my iPad, and you can connect to my mouse, and there's a pencil. So I'm like, I think there are like easy mobile ways to do things, but I'm like, when you're on a touch screen,
I've like
this
mirrored
big.
it to my like TV before.
Yeah.
In like an Airbnb.
That's a good idea.
Good question. I can't believe I'm going to ask this, but what do you do for media management when you shoot on a phone? Do you store everything on the cloud or?
Yeah, depends on where it's going, probably in the cloud or on Google Drive. Google Drive is like my go-to for pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of like when I'm editing something on a phone, I'll use like Apple or the iPhone like files.
Yeah.
Because you can store things in your files, and you can usually for different editing software on your phone, you can pull from files, not just from your photo library. So it's still a way to have like file management.
And Premiere Rush is really good at that too.
I haven't really used that.
Yeah, I used to use CapCut all the time, but I just started using Premiere Rush, and it's like, it can do a lot of things you can do on desktop too, which I like.
Does that freak you out though? You're like, if you don't have any like physical media, like, you know, like it's not on a card or it's not on a hard drive in your backpack, it's just like.
I feel like if the cloud goes down, we got bigger problems. Like then who gives a shit about that edit anymore?
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm just a pessimist, but like, you know, the world goes to shit and the cloud does blow up, and you're like, well.
I would feel sad for my family videos being gone, and so, but that's why I do back them up both ways. Like I have them on the cloud and then a local spot, but like then like if my house exploded and the cloud went down, then I'd be screwed.
I think it also really depends on the quality and the size of the video files, because like I have my kids AirDrop all of their files to my laptop, and so there's a way to actually then they go on a hard drive. I don't know how AirDrop works. I love it. I don't understand it. If there are bigger files, it is hard, and sometimes it won't go through. But if they're just regular like 1080 files or like short 4K files, like from your phone, you usually can like quickly AirDrop.
That's a great point too, because whenever you send those video files and stuff from your phone, depending on the way that you send it, it'll be compressed. So like with airdropping and stuff like that, I think it uses a lower compression rate, so it's more like a raw file that can get.
I don't know if I saw this TikTok, and I just don't believe TikTok all the time, but I saw somebody say that there are like certain hard drives that you can plug directly into your phone. Is that true?
Yeah, especially
Will
now
hard
with
drives
the
show up?
USB-C.
What's that?
It's time to shine.